Good morning, my name is Stephen York. I'm the pastor of the Stonington United Methodist Church in Stonington, Maine. And this morning we would like to welcome you as we consider the subject of imagination and problem solving. Imagination and problem solving. When he was running for president, with his eye on the 1968 nomination to run as a candidate in the fall, Bobby Kennedy said, "Some people wonder why. I wonder why not." One of the challenges that this scripture points to us this morning, this story of Solomon and the two women who have a baby, and they're both claiming the baby, and there's a huge problem in front of the throne over this, and the king has to decide. Why that story speaks to me is because it reminds me that just how ugly and how difficult and how very unpretty some problems can be. We live in a culture where, in the words of my grandparents, when they talked about it, we have people who like to cover up and carry on, to pretend that there is no problem, to act as though all is well. But then when you probe a little bit, but under the surface, we find that there are many things that are struggling. In fact, one of the reasons, I think, for a sense of increased alienation and loneliness in our culture, and for another reason for the increased virtual communication that happens socially in networks across technology, is that there is this longing for connection and to be known, and yet there is this fear of, will I be loved and accepted and understood if people really know what I'm like? I don't know about you, but I like to look good. I like to come out looking like I know what I'm talking about. We all do. None of us really want to dig in to the problems that we bear on a Sunday morning when we come to worship. We don't really want to talk about the things, unless they are so large that everybody knows about them. We generally like to just play it close to ourselves, and understandably so. Problems, by nature, are difficult. One of the problems that with people who take the scriptures very simplistically is that they're trying to take simplistic answers and apply them to complex questions. The Bible is full of complex stories. It's a book full of people who did not always behave well. They did not always make the best choices. They did not always know what they were doing. They were confused. And yet the picture of a loving God who looks at these people and loves them in spite of their confusion and imperfections and their ways of lying and deceitfulness. I mean, how many times did King David of the Psalms lie and cheat and commit adultery? And yet, with all of that mess, he was called a man after God's own heart. It wasn't that God condoned his wrongdoing, but God saw the potential in David and knew that he was a work in progress. But problems can be unsettling. And never have I found that a problem pops up at the right time. Have you noticed that you're minding your own business, things are going along fairly well. Thank you very much. And then suddenly, you know, you get one that just appears out of nowhere. In some ways, I find the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross model from her book on death and dying to apply to these enormous problems. Because when we hear and learn from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, is one of the first things is shock. Many times we are shocked by what is laid upon us. We are shocked about what has been presented to us. And often, like Scott Peck says in his book, we want to say, this is not my problem. As generations live older, and we have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, we're finding in today's world that the older generations are being called upon to figure things out and solve problems or to do things that are almost unprecedented. I remember when I went to college at the age of 17, just as Zachary has done this week, my parents said, now, you're in college, you're on your own, you know, you have some money, you know, you've got to make it. And that's how my life began. Now, I'm not justifying that nor criticizing it. It was just a basic assumption that I was to take responsibility for myself. When I got my first car, I got it. It wasn't handed to me. When I found my first job, I found it. I put myself through school, and you don't want to hear all of this, but you know, doing the proverbial dishes at some diner. But it helped, because I was taught at an early age to take responsibility. But we have raised a culture that does not want to take responsibility for itself. And the great aversion to problem solving is with us. Well, I don't know what to do, so let's just get high. Or let's just get drunk. Not realizing that problems know how to swim. And I don't care how many drinks you try to drown the problem, when you wake up in the morning with a hangover, you will also find those problems still swimming along, waiting for you to address. The problem with the babies, Solomon, is just a metaphor for what you go through. Problems are things that are not easily solved. It's not the same level of problem with, do I want fish or beef for dinner? We're talking about complicated problems in relationships within human families where people turn against each other and where people can't deal and resolve their issues. That's a lot more complicated than deciding, do I want chocolate or strawberry, or am I going to be good and not eat any ice cream at all?